Welcome back to another edition of the Bookworm Mom. Today we're going to be talking about the brand new book, hot off the presses, by Sexton, called Manufacturing Delusion: How the Left Uses Brainwashing, Indoctrination, and Propaganda Against You. Now, I know you're all surprised that is occurring, but before we get into the details of this fantastic book that Buck has written, let's talk a little bit about who is Buck Sexton. Well, he is a co-host of the Clay, Travis, and Buck Sexton Show. It's a nationally syndicated radio program on over 550 stations, and one day we hope to have similar reach here at the Bookworm Mom, but we're not there yet. He is the official successor to the Rush Limbaugh Show, which is a show my mom and dad loved. I listened to it a little bit, but it was more my mom and dad's line. He previously hosted the Buck Sexton Show on Premier Networks, and his commentary on politics and extremism has been featured throughout the media for over a decade. This includes Fox News and CNN. Before his media work, he was a CIA officer in the Counterterrorism Center and in the Office of Iraq Analysis. He completed overseas tours of duty as an analyst in Iraq, Afghanistan, and Nigeria. And Sexton also served in the New York Police Department Intelligence Division while working on the counterterrorism cases, and he currently lives in Miami Beach, Florida. It's funny how many of these CIA folks end up in Florida.
The free state of Florida.
Yeah, so he's down there. A good friend of mine, Sarah Adams, is down in Florida as well. I don't know if she's in Miami, but she's in Florida as well. And, they give me hope that there are actually good CIA folks coming out, because I am not thrilled with a lot of what we've seen in the past from our CIA agents as well as FBI, for that matter. That's correct, yeah. And that kind of plays into this book that he's taken the time to write. It's basically a historical study of how propaganda and brainwashing and indoctrination has formed and, moved through the centuries and through the countries around the world.
Interesting.
It is. I mean, it's really a fantastic book, and you'll excuse all of my my notes, as you kind of jokingly said. It looks like I took a few. Yeah, I've got a lot of those sticky notes, folks. If you were in the studio, you'd see that this book is packed with little sticky notes.
It looks like a book porcupine.
Yeah, with all the little things. One of the first things he talks about is menticide, which is a word they created to talk about the murder of the mind, the death of your mental capacity, menticide. And it really started with Pavlov. Pavlov was a Russian scientist, and most of us have heard of Pavlov. We talk about the dogs, where he treated them and established what became known as conditioning. Mm-hmm. So that, you would ring the bell, and then he would give them food, and ring the bell, and then give them food, and then they were taught to ring the bell, and then food would drop. And they did this until the dogs actually began to salivate at the sound of the bell, because they were conditioned that you're about to receive food. And so that was what was the preeminent theory that led to Joseph Stalin then using menticide to decimate people within what later became the Soviet Union. And it's pretty frightening to think about how they actually enjoyed torture. Because it wasn't enough to, and when I say torture, I should say mental torture. Yeah. It wasn't enough to physically break you. They also wanted to mentally break you. And they talk about in the book how he was able to create these show trials leading up to sentences, mostly before a firing squad, but in some cases they were sent off to the Soviet Gulag. Mm-hmm. And if you've ever heard of Alexander Solzhenitsyn, he's written several great books. The Gulag Archipelago is just a phenomenal book to read. Yeah. But they talk about how the job is they want to not only break you physically, but they want to break you mentally, and they want to break your family mentally. Mm-hmm. So that during these show trials, people would get up and admit to crimes that not only they didn't commit, but that they were incapable of committing. Huh. And then they would beg to be shot. They wanted to be, executed for these crimes that they were in no way capable of having committed. And you think, what would lead a person to the point of such I don't know, exhaustion that you say, look, I murdered this guy in California. I know that I'm in the Soviet Union and I've never been on a plane, never been on a boat, but I still murdered him, so you should shoot me. How'd you do it? That's not relevant. So it was really interesting to see how Stalin was able to use this manipulative tactic to really foment fear.
Wow.
You and I talked a little bit about algorithms. And if you're watching social media, whether it's Facebook, X, Insta, whatever particular system is your, favorite, they all have algorithms. And those things are geared towards clicks, likes, resubmissions, or resharing, whatever you want to call it. And I kind of said, it's funny, there used to be, you'd see cats and kittens and dogs and puppies and, fun, uplifting things, and that would be what you'd see. And it then very quickly transitioned away from that to things that really make you angry, because fear and anger are way stronger than, oh, that's so cute, let me share that.
Yeah.
Those will get occasional shares, but something that you find outrageous that actually enrages you, you're going to share that. And not only are you going to share it, but you're going to comment about it.
Right.
Look at this. Can you believe this guy did X, Y, Z, and they didn't do anything to him? This is an outrage. We should whatever. That's all manipulation.
Yeah.
Even I think Elon's even said he's made attempts to try and fix the algorithm so that certain groups are not getting the attention that they do. And you brought up something, if you want to share kind of what you said before we started about algorithms. It's interesting.
The algorithms have come out, and everybody thinks that they're there to start promoting. If people start liking it, they're going to raise you up into the algorithms. It's not exactly what they're doing. What they're doing is if you start coming up, they're starting to push, the algorithm is trying to push you down.
Suppress
so you have fewer views. And part of it is, like you're saying, the Pavlovian, they want to see if they can push you to do more outrageous and greater things, because you're like, oh, I'm not getting as many views, I'm not getting as many likes, I'm not getting as many, cross things. So then you start pushing the envelope, and that is the dirty secret behind what these algorithms are doing, is exactly what you're talking about right there. They're trying to make you commit menticide in society. Yeah.
So in the book, he talks about the phases of menticide, the phases of that mental murder occurring. And phase 1 is what he says is artificial breakdown and deconditioning. Phase 2, submission to and positive identification with the enemy. That comes to mind, to me, Stockholm Syndrome, where he famously had the kidnappers suddenly having the victims aligning themselves with the kidnappers instead of the police and the rescuers. So that's, so submission to a positive identification with the enemy. Phase 3, reconditioning to a new order. And phase 4, liberation from the totalitarian spell. So
that reminds me of you're probably too young for this, but the SLA out in the Symbionese Liberation Army capturing a young, I'm trying to think of she was a publisher's daughter, I believe, and having her side with them and committing
kind of like Jane Fonda.
Yeah, committing bank robberies.
Yeah.
So
wow.
Yeah,
it's I don't even know. In this whole goal, they want to create a level of confusion. And I, as I'm reading this book, I'm trying to put it into context. Okay, I've actually seen this exemplified in, whatever example that comes to mind. So he says, Mirlo, so I'm talking about, he writes a book called The Rape of the Mind. And he describes how this confusion and everything works. He says, one important result of this procedure is the great confusion it creates in the mind of every observer, friend or foe. In the end, no one knows how to distinguish truth from falsehood. The totalitarian potentate, in order to break down the minds of men, first needs widespread mental chaos and verbal confusion, because both paralyze his opposition and cause the morale of the enemy to deteriorate. Wow. And what I think of when I read that is, words matter. The fact that, like Russia, when they invaded Ukraine, they didn't call it a war. They called it a liberation. They were freeing their fellow Russians who had been, captured by the Ukrainians or forced by the Nazis in Ukraine to whatever. And it's like, are you kidding me? You're not liberating people. This is just war.
Right.
So interesting how you can use words to mean one thing when they actually mean something else. Confusion is also biblically something the enemy does.
Yeah.
That is one of his tactics. And then a term that I know we've probably all heard bandied about lots is the term brainwashing. Mm-hmm. And it also has its origins in a very interesting place. An American journalist, Edward Hunter, was the first to use the term brainwashing in his 1950 Miami Daily News article, Brainwashing Tactics Force Chinese into Ranks of Communist Party. The word itself actually comes from the Chinese translation of Mandarin from ji, which means wash, to nao, which means brain, so brainwash. Mm-hmm. So the Chinese have been effectively using this for a number of years. You have the whole Manchurian candidate idea that somebody's totally subservient, and then when a certain thing happens, they click into whatever it is their action is supposed to be. Mm-hmm. They get the whistle, if you will, or the bell,
Yep.
and they click in the Pavlovian work. So that it's just a fascinating chapter when he talks about how the Chinese implemented this, how Mao Zedong was able to implement this as well. So it is, riveting stuff to read. It's not, it's not fiction. This is nonfiction. So this is true stuff that happened. Then he goes on to talk about the American Cultural Revolution. And I think that's something that we need to understand that, we're falling into the same things of cultural Marxism. A friend of mine, G. Van Fleet, has written a couple of books, and she talked about that during COVID. She was up in Loudoun County, Virginia, and she went before the school board and said, look, I know what this is. I recognize it from my time as a child in China. This is cultural Marxism. You're trying to brainwash students into believing something is true that is patently false. Yeah. And we need to push back against this. And one of the things that is an example of this, and this is probably going to get a lot of hatred, if we get any responses, it'll be hatred on this, that's the transgender movement.
Yeah.
The idea that a man can become a woman and a woman can become a man. You can put lipstick on a pig, it's still a pig.
Yeah.
You can cut things off or try to add things to, and it doesn't change genetically who you are, DNA. But for the left, it's about how you feel.
Yes.
It's not about reality. Mm-hmm. So it is definitely cultural Marxism to tell you that you can be whatever you want to be, and if anybody says otherwise, we'll punish them.
Yeah.
And so you have this Harvard professor that he talks about in his book who actually came out and said, look, you can't change genetics. Only women menstruate. Men do not menstruate. Transgender women do not menstruate. Only biological women can. And subsequently, they didn't fire her, but they were so hostile to her at Harvard that she ended up taking early retirement at like age 57 from Harvard because she couldn't get any help. Yeah. No graduate students would come and work for her, which is kind of the backbone of how you get research done is with the grad assistants. Mm-hmm. So they have a way, they being, whatever nefarious body is trying to force you to accept this brainwashing or this menticide. Yeah. They will manipulate you in ways that gets your attention, whether it's they cost you your job or your standing in society or both. Mm-hmm. It doesn't have to just be where they physically torture you, because typically when someone says, "Oh, he or she underwent extreme torture," what do you think of when someone says that?
Well, I usually think of physical torture.
Yeah. You think of whipping or pulling their nails out or putting bamboo shoots under their fingernails, those kinds of things. And I'm not saying that doesn't occur. Obviously, it does in torture, but this is a mental form of torture that goes beyond that because they're telling you to do, gosh, folks, here's a book to read, 1984. If you haven't read that book, please, for the love of God, get it, read it, try to grasp it. At the end of the book, they actually succeeded in getting the guy to say 2 + 2 is 5, which everybody knows. No, 2 + 2 is 4. Always will be, always has been, never going to change. And so a man is a man, a woman is a woman, always has been, always going to be, never going to change. But you have this major push from these transgender rights folks who are trying to break down our mental faculties to commit menticide on Americans And we're just beginning to push back against that in a way that is showing real promise and results. A lot of the European countries have pushed back as well. They were the first to kind of stop some of this transgender surgery that was being, I don't even know what the word would be, precipitated, forced upon young kids.
Yeah.
I mean, I know I saw some research maybe 2 or 3 years ago that said the brain doesn't fully develop until like age 26.
Yeah.
And we consider a person an adult at age 18. But yet we were allowing children as young as 10, 11, in some cases even younger than that, to undergo chemical castration or even surgical castration.
Yeah.
And, people made jokes of it in the beginning and said, well, my son also thinks he's Superman, so should I dress him up and let him jump off buildings?
He thinks he's a pirate. Should I poke out his eye and remove his leg?
Exactly. I mean, it's insane. But they want us to accept this. And probably the best example of that would be in the NCAA swim national championships, where you have Leah Thomas, formerly William Thomas, who has declared himself a female. And all he did was grow his hair out long. That was it.
Yeah.
And big, huge, strapping, tall guy. He gets into a race with Riley Gaines, who, I think she's probably about my height, maybe around 5'5", 5'7", something like that. Standing beside him, she looks like a miniature swimmer, and he's this giant thing. Now, she was able to tie him. That's how good of a swimmer she was.
Yeah.
She tied him. And instead of giving them both the national championship, they said, we're going to give it to him.
Yeah. Yeah. And he was 512th in the world when he was in the men's.
Yeah, in the men's. So it's just, and that should speak volumes right there when people say, oh, well, there's no real benefit or difference between a male and a female. Again, he was 512th.
Yeah.
And he tied her, and she was number one. So what does that tell you? It means that if you had the top swimmer in the women's swimming against the top swimmer in the men's, it wouldn't even be close.
Right.
Wouldn't even be close. So, that's part of it. And then you have the next thing, well, actually, maybe it came before that, actually, was racism and COVID.
Oh,
okay.
Yeah.
You remember COVID? Everybody had to wear a mask, 6 feet distancing. And that was a random number they picked out of the air.
Yeah.
And depending on the day of the week, one day Fauci would say masks were bad. The next day, wear 2 masks. It's just like, what in the world? People couldn't get together for Thanksgiving. You couldn't go to restaurants, but you could still go shopping at the grocery store. You go to Home Depot, Lowe's. That was perfectly fine. We had to wear a mask.
Yeah. Unless, of course, you had that special DNA that only politicians possess.
Right. And then you could go to the French Laundry, no problem.
That's right.
A little hat tap to Gavin Newsom. So it was very interesting that people had to wear masks and be distanced from one another, and on and on and on it went. And then, of course, the COVID disease was so bright that it somehow knew as long as you're wearing the mask, couldn't get you. And if you went to a restaurant later when they finally allowed you to go and they distanced you from people in the restaurant, you had to wear your mask till you got to the table. And if they served you water or food, you could take your mask off, because then COVID was like, dang it, can't get them now. Shoot, they've got water.
That's right.
That is our kryptonite. So we'll back away now. But there was one example during COVID when they didn't care if you wore a mask. They didn't care if hundreds or thousands of you got together and were shoulder to shoulder, and that was the George Floyd protest.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
People were taking to the streets, and of course it was mostly peaceful burning of buildings.
That's right.
And property.
That's right.
During that period, we were told, literally, you remember the reporter live on the news, buildings burning behind
him,
me? It's mostly peaceful, a couple of fires. I'm like, what? It's not peaceful. What?
No.
Holy cow. Yeah. So there was that. And, so they kind of go through that and how the mainstream media has really led their part. And later in the book, he talks about propaganda, but you could certainly talk about propaganda during this phase as well.
Oh, absolutely.
And go back to talk about what's truth, the confusion over what's true and what's not true.
Well, it depends on what is.
Exactly. Okay, Bill Clinton, hat tip to you, buddy. I did not have sex with that woman. So, yeah. And then he kind of talks a little bit about the Nazis and how they were able to manipulate an entire population, the whole population of Germany, and to some degree, citizens around the world bought into the anti-Semite anti-Semitism view that the Jews were the bad guys, and that's rising again. We're seeing a prevalence of that once again due to the Gaza and the Palestinian situation and propaganda being spread. But to imagine living in a city where they had a concentration camp like Birkenau or Auschwitz, where they were burning people in these ovens, if you've ever smelled, well, everybody has. Probably most of us have cooked chicken or steak or whatever, and it has a particular smell or aroma. Well, there's a different smell or aroma that comes with a person being burned. It's not pleasant. And so to try to deny to yourself, well, that's not really what it is. It's something else. It can't be what it is. Now, I saw 10,000 people brought in, and I looked into the fence, and there's 2,000 people. Those other 8,000 people were let go. They just went back. I didn't see them leave, but they did clearly. Safely back home with their families. So that was a form of brainwashing, menticide, confusion, truth, lying, propaganda, whatever you want to call it, that occurred during that period in time. And then he kind of goes into some of the consequences of all of this fear, where you're constantly in a state of panic, almost schizophrenic, and oh, I'm being attacked. Oh my God, they want you to stay in this heightened level of fear and anger,
right?
And there are consequences for that. Now, everybody's heard of PTSD by now. It didn't exist in World War I or World War II. Not that the symptoms and the illness didn't exist, but the terminology did. Post-traumatic stress disorder.
Shell-shocked.
Shell-shocked, exactly. That's what you typically heard. What they have discovered is that in a study done in 2021, there were 120 German soldiers that observed changes in their brain structure. Now, this didn't come from actual physical trauma like a traumatic brain injury, a TBI. This simply came from witnessing things that happened in the war, whether it was people being killed, children being killed, things being blown up, whatever. It changed their brains, and they could actually see this, study this, and recognize that PTSD is not simply you were too close when an explosion went off and it rattled your brain and created this traumatic brain injury. So to me, that is a really important thing to acknowledge, because I've even been guilty of this myself, where someone claims PTSD, and I think, you weren't even shot, you weren't even close to an explosion, nobody, whatever. How could you possibly have PTSD? Well, you know what? You can certainly have it just from the stress and the fear, the constant sirens going off. There's incoming missiles. The threat of, okay, I know what that means. If a missile hits us, we're all dead. I've lost friends. There were soldiers killed on the other side of the base, and though I wasn't there, I didn't see the bodies. I know that it happened. I had to report the bodies, and the families were notified, whatever. So my husband is an example of a soldier who thankfully was spared any harm. He was not shot or blown up or anything like that, but he certainly did witness having to send out messages that we've got soldiers missing, we've had soldiers killed. And I've never taken into consideration that alone, and he worked third shift, which, I mean, even here in the civilian world where nobody's trying to blow you up or shoot you or kill you, third shift, graveyard shift, is a horrific shift to work. It's not natural. Your body is not accustomed to working at night and sleeping during the day. It's not normal. The circadian rhythm is off. That causes its own set of problems. And then he had the pressure of being the highest ranking officer awake. So anything that went wrong, it was on him. And so, after reading this book, I've taken a step back and said, we probably need to have a conversation and maybe talk about some of the things I've witnessed since he got back to make sure that he is not, suffering from some of that damage that was done to him from post-traumatic stress disorder. But he'll never admit to that. And that's the other problem with a lot of soldiers who go through things. They don't want to admit that there's nothing wrong with me. I'm good. So now, they also talk about, or he talks about in the book, isolation and how that's an effective tool for breaking down the mind and being able to then take those individuals and manipulate them, which is one of the reasons why we don't allow people to be locked in solitary confinement indefinitely, because that is damaging. Even people that have elderly, like my mother, who's 82, the greatest danger to my mom is isolation, being alone, not having a conversation, not having human connection. Connection is everything. We are a creature created to connect with other humans. We're not designed to be in isolation.
That's why I fear this virtual self-isolation that some of the younger people are doing, because they think that they have
connections
on the phone because of social media and so on, and that's not real connection.
It isn't at all. So that's one of the ways that the Taliban has been successful in getting people trapped off into the isolated mountains in Afghanistan, being able to get them to agree to Islamist thought, not Muslim thought, Islamist thought, where the idea of blowing yourself up is the highest and greatest thing you can achieve, and it will bring you great connection because you're going to get 72 virgins in the hereafter. I don't know what the women get because they've created some female suicide folks either.
Yeah.
But and then the same isolation technique was used in North Korea as well. I've got a quote here I want to read. This is from an escapee, a refugee of North Korea, and she says the following: I still remember the very first thing that my mom told me as a young girl was that don't even whisper because the birds and mice could hear me. If I said the one thing that was wrong, they were not going to execute me. They were going to execute 3 to 8 generations of my family. After this kind of dark era, I decided to escape from my homeland when I was 13 years old.
Wow.
Can you imagine being told as a small child that the mice and the birds would hear you and then report what you said, and it would lead not to just your execution, but generations.
Yeah.
That is a staggering thing to do to a young child, which again goes back to this whole idea of how in the world have we allowed this nonsense to occur with this transgender ideology of manipulating young kids.
Right.
Again, he talks about the true believer within Islamists and their willingness to blow themselves up because they think they're going to get something. There's this connection there with others that they didn't have. Mm-hmm. And then he brings up something that I found really interesting. He talks about Saul Alinsky, another great book to read, Rules for Radicals.
Yes, absolutely.
I mean, it's critical. And so he says you have to target people that are weak. And he says it's a desperate search for personal identity to let other people know that at least you are alive. Let's take a common case in the ghetto. A man is living in a slum tenement. He doesn't know anybody and nobody knows him. He doesn't care for anyone because no one cares for him. And he goes on and basically says the community organizer, and what famous community organizer can we all recall?
Barack Obama.
Yeah, Barack Hussein Obama. Great community organizer, big fan of Saul Alinsky. Another Democrat who was a big fan of Saul Alinsky, Hillary Rodham Clinton.
Yep.
So these folks were trained by some of the best brainwashing agents in the world. We talk about propaganda. They misuse, manipulate things. J.F. Kennedy wrote the book, A Nation of Immigrants, and they have used that book over and over again to talk about how we need to let immigrants in, but they don't mention the fact that the Nation of Immigrants was talking about settlers who arrived here in an untamed wilderness, built their homes and towns with their own hands, and somehow that's analogous to bringing in third world refugees and immediately giving them welfare and housing and all of food stamps and all of those things.
Yet it sounds incredibly like people taking stolen lands.
Yeah. We have that, and then we have to have, what is it? You have to go out and do the land acknowledgments because of that. He talks about language manipulation, which I mentioned that a little bit earlier. Don't call it war, call it a liberation or a special operation. Remember the Vietnam? What was that called? That was
Well, there's a great video. It's a kind of a joke video. It's put on by Reason TV.
Yeah.
And it's a game show called War, Not a War.
Right, yeah.
And they go through each of them ever since World War II, all of the things that we've had and the titles that they're given.
Well, it goes back to the other book I was talking about, Ministry of Truth.
Yeah.
Is really Ministry of Peace is really about war. I mean, all of that. Yeah. So this is not really a new concept, but it continues to show up over and over again. Then Buck talks a little bit about recycling, and he jokes that, people think recycling is this great thing and you need to do it. And he goes, but the truth of the matter is the recycled plastic then finds its way to a river system and eventually on to the ocean sea. But if you tell people recycling, it's a waste of time, they'll look at you and think you're crazy or immoral, because most of the plastic that Americans are encouraged to recycle, for instance, ends up in landfills or sold overseas to developing countries where there's less regulation. So, and finally, I'll kind of wrap up with artificial intelligence, AI. the union of technology and mind control. And I'll close it by saying this. Look, I now watch videos and go, is this real or is this AI?
Yeah, I do that too. Yeah.
And then I say, what message is this trying to put across? Is it a message that I agree with? And so I want to share it because it shares what I view as truth? Or is this a message that's designed to enrage me because it's in opposition to my beliefs? And what's the benefit, of either of those positions? And I've gotten to the point that now, like on X, there's a little signal at the top that you can click, and it's Grok. And you can say, Grok, is this real? Is this true? Whatever. There's discussions now about making people, when you post a video, you have to acknowledge, you have to put somewhere on this is AI. Well, that's fine for people that are honest, but for those individuals who are genuinely trying to perform menticide on you, they're not going to. That's just like telling somebody, you have to register your guns. Well, the only people that do it are lawful citizens.
Gun-free zone.
Yeah, if only, what is it? If everybody's turning the weapon, the only people that'll have guns will be the illegal people who have guns, not lawful citizens. So same thing with the AI. If the only people that are sharing it lawfully, anyway, it's not going to work. I don't know how you fix it. Honestly, I don't know. And right now in Florida, Ron DeSantis, one of my favorite governors, has pushed and said, I don't want, ID. I don't want this, AI to follow you around or whatever. But then they've pushed through a bill that says you have to prove that you're an adult. They don't want kids on the internet. And I agree with not having kids on the internet. But the problem is the only way to verify if they're a kid or not is what? ID.
ID, yeah.
So, and most 12, 13-year-old kids don't have ID. So that means the parent is going to have to use their ID. And it's just, so again, there you are on the internet. So, and the internet's what? Forever.
Yeah.
So there are a lot of problems out there. And it's all geared towards making you feel and think and react in a certain way. Mm-hmm. Have you ever played the game Fallout?
No, I don't think I have.
Well, it's now been made into a TV show, and I believe it's on Netflix, but it could be on Prime. I get the two confused all the time. But why I bring it up is because in the show, if you've watched it, this isn't a spoiler, but if you've watched it, there is this little device that they connect to the back of your head that then controls you and basically makes you a neutered person, and you don't have anger anymore. You're just happy all the time. And they use an example where these two guys are like literally beating each other to death with sticks, and they've already had the devices implanted, but they haven't been turned on.
Yeah.
And so the female's like, "Well, Dad, stop it!" And he goes, "Okay, hit the button." She doesn't want to hit the button because she knows that's mind control, but at the same time, she doesn't want them to kill each other. So she finally hits the button, and they turn into these little kittens, and they're just like, "Oh, let me help you. You need a Band-Aid," And it's just insane. Like seconds earlier, they were trying to murder one another, and now they're best buds.
Yeah.
So that to me is kind of what I worry that AI is headed towards, where it's going to be so manipulative that we're all going to become just little controlled versions of this Fallout guy.
Absolutely, yeah.
So the book is called Manufacturing Delusion. It's by Buck Sexton. It's brand new. You can pick it up any place where you get your books, folks. It's another gripping book that's great to read, and it's easy to read. It's not like filled with facts and statistics that are going to bore you down. You're kind of going to go through it pretty quickly. You can also get it on Audible. So if you don't like to read, or you're in your car and you just want to have the book read to you, I do both.
Yep.
So I encourage you to pick it up and give it a read right now.
Well, fantastic. We will have the link to that read in the description, and we'll also have some other little information for all of our listeners in the description. And tune in next week, and we're going to have some more interesting and wonderful book reads from the Bookworm Mom.
Great, guys. See you
Thank
next week.
you. Bye.